buy that for $1.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Gareth. This is Book, Songs and Other Magic. And I'm going to do a video now where I talk about something I've been meaning to talk about for a while. And I was spurred on by a particular book I found, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And that made me want to do this video. And then I saw another video recently on a very big booktuber's channel that was really good. Typically of her channel, it was a fantastic video. But it made me think, oh yeah, I should do it now rather than later, because it could be that people are thinking about these kind of things, and it could be something where, you know, this video becomes part of the conversation or something, maybe. I don't know. But blurbs, book blurbs. It's a great subject because they're quite odd in some ways. Sometimes they're really helpful, sometimes they're not particularly helpful. It's interesting to see who has written the blurbs. I know that sometimes blurbs get written when they haven't read the book. That happens. But I just think it's a really interesting thing to talk about. So I've actually pulled out a bunch of books. So I don't know, it's about 30 or 40 books here in front of me. And I was going to use some of them to talk about the whole thing about blurbs. And I'm going to start off by just showing you this book that made me notice the blurb in a big way. It's a very unusual blurb, and it made me go, what? And I bought it because of the blurb. So blurbs are intended to get you to buy the book. And this first book I'm going to show you, I bought it because of the blurb. So it worked. But also, just mention the fact that Merphy Napier, obviously, if you're watching a booktube video, I'm sure you know about Merphy's channel, because she is amazing at what she does. Her channel is incredible, and you know, I'm sure lots of us aspire to do video content as sophisticated and interesting as she does. But she did a video about blurbs where she was looking at them and just saying, sometimes just going, why? And sometimes saying, yeah, I get that, I agree with that. And I thought it might be quite a nice idea to start off by telling you about this book that made me notice blurbs in a big way. Talk to you about a book that I have mentioned a few times in this channel, this book here. I'm going to talk about this book in a minute, because it's a book of quotations, and the first chapter is about blurbs. So I'll talk about that. And then I've got a selection of my favourite books, and I thought it'd be fun to look at the blurbs and just say whether or not I think they give an insight into the book, or if they're a bit useless, or whether I agree with it, that kind of thing. And then I have got a bunch of books I haven't read that I was just going to look at the blurb and see if that influences how quickly I'll read it, or how excited I am about it, or if it doesn't really matter, that kind of thing. Then I'll finish, because his name is all over books in the blurb part of the book covers. Stephen King. I'm going to finish with 3 books by Stephen King that are just part of my collection. Just randomly took them out, and I'll have a look at the blurbs and make a comment about those to finish off. That's the plan of action. So let's start off with just telling you about this book. So Spider Robinson is a science fiction writer, mostly, who's been compared to Robert Heinlein. I think they were friends, and I think he finished some Heinlein stuff as well, something like that. I might not be absolutely accurate with that, but something like that. But he's connected to Heinlein, as well as being compared to him as well in his writing style and that. And I have read other things by Spider Robinson, and I saw this book, and I was intrigued by the cover anyway, but then I was also intrigued by the fact it was him. But then I was really intrigued by the blurb on the front is by David Crosby. What? So David Crosby has been asked to write a blurb on here. Once again, Spider Robinson proves that he's a master wordsmith and storyteller. Another wonderful tale from the edge of what's possible. A nice blurb. If that was the blurb in itself and it was just from, I don't know, Entertainment Weekly or something, then I wouldn't necessarily buy it. But David Crosby makes me think, what? And there's a bunch of other blurbs on the back. The back is full of blurbs. And one of them's David Gerald, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that's Spider Robinson's at his best when he's most passionate. And Very Hard Choices is Spider Robinson at his very best. If you're expecting a nice, polite distraction that you can put down and forget, you're going to be very annoyed. This isn't a story, it's a wake-up call. And it isn't over until you decide it's over. Interesting. That does make you a bit intrigued, doesn't it? And Robinson is the hottest writer to hit science fiction since Harlan Ellison. And he can match the master's frenetic energy and emotional intensity, arm break for gut wrench. That's from Los Angeles Times. So, you know, intriguing blurbs, but let's face it, David Crosby, that is weird. A science fiction book with a blurb from David Crosby. So that made me think, isn't that weird that you got a blurb like that? And I thought it was just and then that made me want to have a little look at blurbs. And then Merphy did that video, blah, 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 blah. So, ghastly beyond belief. Ghastly beyond belief. This is one of my oldest possessions. You can see that it's very loved. This is a book by Neil Gaiman and Kim Newman. And it's definitely part of their early career. And it came out in 1985. It came out in 1985, so I was 14. That's why it's one of my oldest possessions. I absolutely love this book. It's a book of science fiction quotations. If you ever get a chance to, if you see it anywhere, get it. It's very unusual to find. It's very rare. And it's an amazing book. I love it. I absolutely love it. The first half of the book is quotations from science fiction books. And the second half of the book is full of quotations from science fiction films. And I actually met Neil Gaiman when I went to visit our main guild hall, and he was doing a big talk. He just released Ocean at the End of the Lane and Fortunately the Milk. And he'd done a thing actually earlier in the day, in the afternoon, where he opened a road that's been named after the book Ocean at the End of the Lane. So just down the road from here, just by the beach, is a road called Ocean at the End of the Lane. And so I saw him open that, and then in the evening he did this talk at the guild hall. It was brilliant, and he kind of did this sort of signing thing at the end, and he was really nice, very friendly, really lovely conversation. I told him I had this, and I actually treasured it, and he was really chuffed. He was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you got that," and we chatted a bit about it. So that was really cool. But the first chapter is all about blurbs. And these blurbs are not the blurbs written by other people, which is what most of these books are going to be. These blurbs in these chapters are blurbs written by the publishers. So the actual blurb on this book is "Sterilize yourself with fear," which is deliberately ridiculous. So, for example, you've got for a book by Harry Adam Knight called Slimer, you've got the blurb on the front, "And death was only the beginning." It's brilliant. For Arcade by Robert Max, it's got "Every night the children met to play the game, whether they wanted to or not. Arcade. They had nothing to lose but their minds." Brilliant. Gaiman Smith, Night of the Crabs. "A seafood cocktail for the strongest stomachs." That's what you can see in this book of quotations. You've got a lovely one here. Where is it? This is from Time Jump by John Brunner. "Weird, wild, stunning, will make your pulse rev up and your brain stand on end." Terror, conflict, oppression, and a galaxy in chains. That's Empire of Chaos by H.K. Bulmer. Only one man could save the world, and he was dead. Again. I'm going to say it again. Only one man could save the world, and he was dead. Again. That's by Philip K. Dick, and that's Now Wait for Last Year. So, yeah, there's some good stuff in this book. It's a really good book if you want to find it. Yeah, so those blurbs were written by the publishers on the back of the book, and it's not exactly the same as what I'm looking at now, which are where they've got a quote from somebody, obviously initiated by that one by David Crosby. So, let's have a look. These are some of my favourite books. Let's see what they've said about them. So, Giovanni's Room. Let's see if I agree with what they've said. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. On the back, it's got "Exquisite, a feat of fire-breathing, imaginative daring" by The Guardian. I don't really know what that means, so that doesn't really help at all. It's a funny won that one. There is another one here by Carol Phillips that says audacious, remarkable, elegant, and courageous. That's better. I think that's true. I think it's an incredible book. And I think that's true for all that. I still don't know if it really tells you what the book's about, but I guess it's going next to the synopsis at the back as well. But yeah, interesting, audacious, remarkable, elegant, and courageous. Accurate, but is it enough? Is it enough? Highrise by J.G. Ballard. The writing is cool, the observation exact, the idea bold and well developed. Everything seems to demand attention and analysis. By the Financial Times. I don't really know if I want a quote from the Financial Times, but it's an interesting set of words, isn't it? The writing is cool, which is a little bit distant, actually, a little bit cold. The observation exact, the idea bold and well developed. Everything seems to demand attention and analysis. I think this is better. Martin Amis quote from the back here. Martin Amis at the back. Ingenious, Highrise is an intense and vivid bestiary which lingers unsettlingly in the mind. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a good one for Highrise, which I would recommend, by the way. Amazing book. Okay, so Hiromi Kawakami's Strange Weather in Tokyo, a book I really like a lot. It's a very unusual book. It's a romance with a very unusual couple. The blurbs are, Amy Sackville says, a dreamlike spell of a novel, which I think I can see that. But you've got a very vivid blurb here by The Guardian. A drama marinated in beer, sake, miso soup, humour, poetry, and wonderfully warm, comforting conversation. That does actually sum up the book really well. Kawakami transforms an affecting cross-generational romance into an exquisite poem of time and mutability, often enchanting, but ultimately heartbreaking. This is an unforgettable evocation of love and loneliness. That's really good. That's by The Independent. So yeah, it's pretty good, that blurb. And Strange Weather in Tokyo, I think, is really good. Okay, Razorblade Tears, a book I've talked about loads on the channel. Ian Rankin says on the back, the very definition of a white-knuckle ride. Yeah. As close to a thriller masterpiece as it is possible to get. Yeah. I think you do get a good impression with these blurbs, actually. Raw, powerful, and pacey from The Guardian. Yeah. So they're good. They're good blurbs. They don't actually say, one of the really good things about the book is how it explores some of the social themes, but that might be deliberate so it doesn't put people off if they are more traditional crime readers, maybe. But this book tackles homophobia, specifically homophobia, but also race and the rich and poor divide really, really well. So yeah, it's interesting that the blurbs don't mention that. Children of Time, amazing book. And then you've got see, this doesn't really say a lot. There's 3 on the back. One of them is not too bad. The other 2 are really vague. So Patrick Ness, obviously himself a famous fantasy author, wrote A Joy from Start to Finish, Unexpectedly Human. I think he's trying to be witty there, but it doesn't really help. And then sfbook.com has written A Writer Who Really Knows How to Entertain, Essential Science Fiction. See that, like Merphy said in her video, that's a blurb about the writer and not about the book. So that's a little bit vague, really. It doesn't really help you. But then there is a better one, slightly better one from the Financial Times, which is, this is superior stuff, tackling big themes. At least you got the idea that it's tackling big themes in this. I mean, it really does tackle a lot of big themes, and it's a hell of an ambitious piece of work. So it does say that. But yeah, could be better. Touch by Claire North, my favourite Claire North book. Again, I've talked about this book a fair amount on the channel. Poignant and intensely gripping from The Guardian. I don't know if that really tells you much. Breathless and brilliantly original from Love Reading. See, I don't know. I don't know if that really says a lot. None of these really say a lot about the book. dazzlingly, dazzlingly imaginative. What a weird set of words from Sunday Mirror. Just extraordinary from Claire McIntosh. I mean, I agree. I love this book so much, but it doesn't really say a lot. So I don't think those help at all. So you definitely need the synopsis on the back for that one. I would recommend this book, by the way. It really is an amazing book, but those blurbs did not help. Another one that I read around the same sort of time, and it's still one of my favourite books, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. It's had a fair amount of reviews on BookTube, so you might have an opinion about this already. You might have read this. I love this book. The most helter-skelter race to the finish line thriller you'll read all year. I think it does say something about the way Crouch writes, the pacing, and the focus that he makes on energy and the thrill of the read. So that's true. Race to the finish line thriller. Yeah, it does kind of build up to a big climax. Yeah, that's all right, but it still doesn't really say. There are loads of things that they're missing from that blurb, but I guess it's only trying to get you to read it. So yeah, it's all right. Could be better, but yeah, all right. What I would describe as my all-time favorite science fiction book. What? Flowers for Algernon. Love Flowers for Algernon. And what does it say about Flowers for Algernon? It says, a narrative taught of force, very moving, beautiful, and remorseless in its simple logic. One of the universally appealing stories of our time. That's interesting. It's probably trying to be a bit clever. It doesn't grab you instantly, but it is moving. It's beautiful. Remorseless in its simple logic. See, that's a blurb I think that whoever wrote that is trying to write some sort of critical essay. I mean, it could have been taken from a critical essay. Or it looks like it might be a quote from a book anyway, a book on the 100 best novels. Yeah, actually, these are... So that one's... Okay, so there's another quote from a book that says, excellent, extremely moving. Again, doesn't really say a lot. But there is one here from Ian M. Banks. Oh, no, it's not. It's on the series. So, yeah. Yeah, so it's a bit lacking, actually. We don't really get a good blurb for this one, which is ironic, because it's probably one out of all of these books that could do with a good blurb, get people reading it. The Invisible Man, obviously a classic from the SF Masterworks series. My copy is anyway. I mean, there's been tons of different editions. Okay, so this is, again, all about H.G. Wells and not about The Invisible Man. You got Arthur C. Clarke, who says, Wells' scientific romances were works of art with unique relevance for our times. Great quote. But again, doesn't really talk about this book. Brian Aldiss says, the Prospero of all the brave new worlds of the mind and the Shakespeare of science fiction. See, it doesn't... Surely you can get a good blurb about The Invisible Man, specific to this book. Surely. But yeah, I just went on the author on that one. Left Hand of Darkness. And that's not on the front, it's on the back. So this is quite interesting. So there's a blurb from Michael Moorcock. So obviously a renowned writer himself, but also an editor and quite an important figure beyond just the writing in fantasy and science fiction. Michael Moorcock. And he says, profuse and original, graceful and accomplished. I like that. It's not too overly clever, but it's very eloquent. And I think it does sum up the book. So yeah, I like that. Profuse and original, graceful and accomplished. Great book. Leaving science fiction for a moment, you've got Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I really, really liked a lot. I thought it was really good. This is more about, this bit on here is more about the people rather than what it's saying. So, it's by Gabriel Zevin, by the way. Absolutely recommend this book. But Jojo Moyes, famous in her own right, says extraordinary. All right. John Green says one of the best books I've ever read. So again, that's just the name that makes that's there. So you go, oh, I like him. I'll get that. And Celeste Eng wrote, I loved it. Okay. See, it doesn't really say a lot. It doesn't say why they liked it. It's not really going to persuade you to get it in itself. Only if you're fans of those authors, you might go, oh, okay. So I'm not really sure. Actually, all of them are like that. Actually, there's one at the bottom that's not like that. So Pandora Sykes wrote, this blew me away. Stylist wrote, anyone who reads tomorrow can't stop talking about it. Pointless. The Guardian said, exhilarating, timely, and emotive. But the last one is actually quite good. So Tayari Jones wrote, an exquisite love letter to life. That kind of tells you that it's about quality of life and relationships, I think. A little bit. Kind of it's implied in that, which is what that's about. So yeah. Interesting set of pointless blurbs with a good one at the end, I think. So the Sea of Rust and Day Zero, 2 books by C. Robert Cargill that I really like a lot. And let's have a look to see what they say about this. So Sea of Rust, it says, Joe Hill, the horror writer Joe Hill, says visceral, relentless, and breathtaking. Yes, but actually it's a lot more fun than that. That sounds really intensely serious, doesn't it? And I don't think that's how I describe the book. The Financial Times is an action-packed post-apocalyptic thriller that also addresses issues of soul and sentience in a subtle yet profound way. That's better. That is better. It says a lot more. I would recommend this. It's really, really good. And then the prequel, which is Day Zero. It's got the same quote from the Financial Times, which is brilliant. So, an action-packed post-apocalyptic thriller that also addresses issues of soul and sentience. And that's terrible, isn't it? Because actually, it's a different book, so they shouldn't have done that. With a philosophical heart that asks big questions about life, death, and the soul, this is accomplished, technically complex sci-fi. That's from SFX magazine. Yeah, not bad. I think there's a lot of heart in this book, though. This book is a little lighter and more. There's more heart in this, a little bit more emotive than the other one. So there is a difference. That's a nice little blurb. In the Ghastly Beyond Relief kind of definition of blurbs here. It was a day like any other, except it was our last. It's a good book. I like it. 1984. This is an interesting one because when I picked this up to see what the blurb said, the first blurb I saw was by Joe Brand. So the comedian, Joe Brand, says, more relevant to today than almost any other book you can think of. It's a nice blurb. I like Joe Brand. She's a very intelligent woman. I'm sure it's very cool that she's on there. But yeah, it doesn't really say a lot. I think it's interesting that the one underneath is from Margaret Atwood. And it says, right up there among my favourite books. I read it again and again and again. Neither of them really say a lot about the book. So, I don't know. Maybe when they get that famous, when books get that famous, they don't have to do that. I don't know. But it doesn't say a lot, I don't think. And then just to finish off this thing about favourite books, The Sheriff of Ymir. I love this book by Michael Rubens. It's a really, really funny book and a very original book. And The Witch the Eagle says, a silly, fun romp across the universe. Pretty good. Publishers Weekly says, a rocket-fast, knee-slapping narrative. Light-hearted and adventure-filled, Cole's ludicrous exploits keep the laughs coming. Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to... I mean, to be fair, if you say too much about the plot, it will spoil things anyway. So you just got to say how funny it is, really. So that's pretty good. Just recommend that book so much. So those are the ones that I've read, some of my favourite books. Here's some books that I haven't read to see if it makes me want to read them or if I can reference what I already know about the authors. So I've just got Piranesi Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And this is an interesting one because you've got a quote from David Mitchell, the author, and he says, "What a world Susanna Clarke conjures into being, with what a tick-tock of reveals. Piranesi is an exquisite puzzle box." I think that's intriguing. Kind of gives you a sense that the book will unfold with this sort of mysterious, fantastical element, which is kind of interesting. And I like this one from Madeline Miller as well. "A miraculous and luminous feat of storytelling. I already want to be back in its haunting and beautiful halls." So quite vivid blurbs that make you want to read the book there. Victoria Corrin's memoir about poker, which I'm really keen to read, but I haven't got to it yet. For Richer, for Poorer, Confessions of a Player. You've got one from The Observer here that says, "A terrific poker book and a terrific memoir. Engaging, lucid, full of verve, and a pleasure to read." So that's pretty cool. Martin Amis says, "For Richer, for Poorer, seizes the reader with its first sentence and never lets go. Victoria Corrin writes on several levels with wit, honesty, and perfect freshness. Fresh, funny, and moving. This is a wonderful book worthy of comparison with the best." See, that's a bit more vague. You could have just thrown that out without looking at the book. That's from a literary review. So a bit of a mixed bag on the back there as far as useful blurbs, but I am looking forward to reading that. Few more here. This is a collection of short stories I recently got secondhand from Fritz Liber. And there's what I like about this, to use this for this video, is there's a quote from Damon Knight. So, very renowned editor and writer in science fiction. "Fritz Liber is author of the most frightening and thoroughly convincing of all modern horror stories." I'm not sure if that really makes a difference. But the fact it's Damon Knight might do. Don't know. Yeah, that's the sort of thing where he's not like... Because the thing is, obviously, with blurbs, you get tons of blurbs with Stephen King making a comment, making a blurb, because of his name. And you often get, not necessarily Douglas Adams writing the blurbs, but you get tons and tons of books compared to Hitchhikers. If it's a comedy science fiction, it's compared to Hitchhikers. So with that one, for the more knowledgeable science fiction fan who would know who Damon Knight is, that's quite a good blurb for that. But he's not a star for the general kind of run-of-the-mill kind of member of the public, probably. You got, this is a good one because, again, it's kind of connected to the book. You've got Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne, and you've got a blurb there from Richard Dawkins. So he says, "Compelling, masterful, outstandingly good." But I think that works because Richard Dawkins endorsing the book is an important element of why you might be persuaded to get it, because it's Richard Dawkins, and if you're into evolution, you might be into Richard Dawkins. And then there's a Richard Layman book here, and I don't know. It's kind of interesting that you've got a very vague one here from Stephen King. Again, he's been asked to write something, and he's just written, "If you've missed Layman, you've missed a treat." And I've seen that in so many of his books. It doesn't really say a lot, so it's pointless, really. And then you've got Dan Marlowe has written Stephen King Without a Conscience, which tells you a little bit more about the book. I mean, Richard Layman, haven't read this one yet, but I've read other Richard Layman stuff. And yeah, clearly he is not like Stephen King. And it's the basest kind of horror you could read, really. So yeah, Stephen King Without a Conscience. Yeah, I'm going to finish with as I said, with the Stephen King ones. I've just mentioned him, didn't I? So these three books are just three examples of Stephen King. You've got Mr. Mercedes, Needful Things, and Outsider. I've read those two, and I haven't read that one yet. I haven't read The Outsider, but I've read these two. That is actually my second favourite Stephen King book, and this is a recent one I've really liked that I've read. So just to start off with Mr. Mercedes, you've got a quote from Irish Mail on Sunday says a thrilling cat and mouse game. So that does tell you something about the plot, because that is true. That is ultimately what it is. So I think that works really well. And it's certainly better than the Guardian's one. I challenge you not to read this book in one breathless sitting. Don't think that helps much. And I think this one's a little bit strong. Daily Mail saying deserves to be ranked alongside the King's masterpieces. I don't think it's one of his masterpieces. I liked it a lot, but I think he's written better books. But yeah, that's kind of a mixed bag again as far as blurbs on the back. Needful Things, which I really, really love this book. The blurb on the back is just about King, an incredibly gifted writer whose writing is so fluid that you often forget that you're reading. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's a good quote. It's a nice quote about him, but it doesn't really say anything about Needful Things, which is a shame, clearly. I like that. The blurb is good here, though. The publisher's blurb. Buy now, pay later. That's so true for this book. Awesome. And then this one I haven't read yet, so it'll be like looking at it fresh. This is The Outsider, and the Sun says a taut, clever read that will keep you guessing until the end. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. That does make me want to read it, but it also gives me a sense of what kind of book it is. And The Guardian says hits a home run, a genuinely intriguing mystery. So yeah, I mean, I know it's one of his crime books, and it's linked to the Bill Hodges trilogy, which is probably why it was near that in my little collection. So yeah, not too bad, those blurbs, to tell you something about what kind of books you've got there. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting subject, and there's some good blurbs, some bad blurbs, there's some funny blurbs, there's some pointless blurbs. There is some blurbs that have made me want to read them, or certainly consolidated that idea. I mean, I started with that Spider Robinson book with David Crosby having a blurb on it, which is just weird and bizarre and awesome. So yeah, I do think it's a really interesting subject. Tell me below what you think of some of those blurbs and how you feel about that. Have you bought a book because of the blurb on the back? Let me know. Thanks a lot, and stay curious, everyone.
Paint me a picture